Well, it's just a real pleasure to be with you today. Chris Stigall filling in for Vince Coglianese today. I do a morning show down the road there in Philadelphia. And if you're curious and you want to hang out beyond today, you can always head over to my website, chrisstigall.com, ChrissStigall, chrisstigall.com, where I do my own podcast as well. You can find me on Twitter, or now X, Facebook. I have the 3 times a week newsletter called the Harumph Society. I would love to have you join that because I value you. I know the Vince Coglianese audience is every bit as smart as mine. So I would love to have you aboard. If you want to check that out, go to chrisstigall.com, click on the Harumph Society, and check it out. One of my great friends, I know she's a friend of Vince's too, she does outstanding work. And it's funny because when I met Julie Kelly, she really wasn't talking about court cases, never mind federal court cases, never mind RICO statutes being implemented. Never mind indictments of former presidents. I mean, we're really in an unprecedented place, and Julie has become sort of the foremost authority on issues like January 6th. She has been combing through court records. She's been granted access by the House to the January 6th tapes, and she's now got her own Substack called Declassified with Julie Kelly. You should read everything she writes at Substack, her Substack account, so you don't miss it because she's in the know. I don't even know how you became such an expert on this, Julie, but I'm glad you're here. Hi.
So, great question. I mean, I think how I got involved in covering January 6th early on was just seeing how the DOJ, Biden's DOJ, was denying release to people who had been involved in the protests who weren't even accused of any violence, attacking police officers, vandalizing property. They were denying release to people who didn't even go inside the building. So what I did, it was like March of 2021, I opened what's called a Pacer account, and that's where you can purchase all of the court filings. And I just figured out how to navigate that. But also because there were COVID restrictions still at the D.C. courthouse, you could call in and listen to these hearings. Otherwise, now you have to go in person to watch any hearings or any of the trials. So I just sort of became addicted to it and just could not believe what I was hearing and seeing. I mean, obviously, we know there are problems with our criminal justice system, and I'm not naive in that regard. But this was clearly such a political selective prosecution.
This is remarkable. If I could just stop you for a second, because what you just said is remarkable in that, much like our public school system, COVID actually, for as much as we all hated that, and I believe we're all still kind of emotionally wrought and ruined over it, COVID inadvertently shone a tremendous white-hot spotlight on things like public education and our legal system, didn't it? That's what you're saying.
It really, you know what? It really did. And that's why when the new chief judge came in, they quickly shut down public access to these hearings and trials when some of the major trials were beginning, because they didn't want the American people to be able to call in and hear what Judge Tim Kelly was doing in the Proud Boys case, or Judge Amit Mehta was doing in the Oath Keepers case, or even some of the low level, Tanya Chutkin. I walked into her courtroom one day and saw her, just completely berate a guy who was convicted for 4 misdemeanors. So so yes, it was an eye-opening experience, just like parents sitting there seeing what some of the teachers were saying to their kids.
So I'm not going to, I know you've watched it, I'm sure. I'm not going to have you sit here and listen to all of it, but I did want you to hear some of it for people that may have missed Tucker's interview with Sund, the former Capitol Police Chief. Let's talk specifically, and Fastity, give me the one you think best. How about this one, number 53, where they talk about feds in the crowd. This has been long called a conspiracy theory by people like you. People have been critical of people like you, calling it nuts and wacko that there were feds involved. Sund pretty well opens the door, or confirms, once and for all that, oh yeah, sure there were. Take a listen to some of this.
So in the aftermath of January 6th, there's been a huge debate over to what extent, there were federal agents or people who are working in some way for federal agencies in the crowd. And the initial explanation was, well, none. And you're insane if you think that. You're Alex Jones, you're crazy. And then over the last couple of years, we've seen people confirm people in authority confirm, actually, yeah, there were a lot in the crowd that day. I mean, that's now a fact. Did you know that going in?
No.
No. So just for perspective, since you've been to a lot of these events, there's a huge a planned demonstration in Washington, D.C. Will there always be assets, agents, people working for federal agencies in the crowd in civilian clothes?
There always could be. And for like inaugurations, there would usually be some combined teams out there. One for communications, but just, for situational awareness. So it wouldn't be surprising, 4th of July, different things like that, where we have threat pictures or concerning threat pictures.
And what does that look like? Does that mean, FBI agents dressed in Dockers and tennis shoes trying to...
Well, it'd just be, plain clothes, plain clothes to blend in. So that wouldn't be unusual, and it'd be, just standard police work. That'd be good police work. So coming into January 6th, and I talk about it in the book with the fact that shortly after January 6th, I'm driving through Loudoun County. I just talked to somebody from the Hill, and I get a call from overseas, and it's press. I don't remember what it was. It's somebody from Great Britain, and they started asking me about feds in the crowd. And I was like, no, I would have been told. I said, no, we're getting word that there was feds in the crowd. I said, no, I would have been told. I've got lots of friends with the Bureau. They all have my cell phone number. They would have told me. Thinking about that, and Jill Sanborn's testimony in 2021, where she said they were taking overt action to keep certain people from coming to January 6th to Washington, D.C. That's big for FBI to start taking overt action. I mean, that's not covert, overt. That's a big deal. Fast forward to February of this year, 2023, in the GAO report that says, on January 3rd, the FBI was tracking 4 domestic terrorists that were talking about coming to Washington, D.C., the Washington field office, their AOR, area of responsibility. By January 6th, they were tracking 18 or 19, it's in the GAO report, domestic terrorists. So think about that. They have 18 or 19 domestic terrorists coming to this event. So of course they're going to have resources on them, and they're not, you're not going to be just putting one agent. You're going to have multiple. So it'd be multiple with that. And I don't know how many they actually had.
So this goes on. I mean, it's a long conversation, but that's the nut of it, Julie. Yeah. So give me your thoughts.
So I encourage people to watch it. I like Steve Sund a lot. He is a straight up guy. I've interviewed him myself. I've read most of his book. I have strong disagreements with Chief Sund on his overall analysis of what happened that day, and the defense of how police for Capitol officers for Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police treat people that day. Police were responsible for killing 3 people that day. So, but Chief Sund is a cop's cop, and that's why they kept him out of the loop. I suspect the 18 or 19 domestic terrorists that the FBI claimed they were tracking were people like Stuart Rhodes, Joseph Biggs with the Proud Boys, Ethan Nordine with the Proud Boys, Thomas Caldwell, the 65-year-old, guy from Virginia. These were not serious domestic terrorists. These were men associated with what Christopher Wray alleges are terrorist groups, the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, that had FBI informants planted in those groups months before. So the idea that there's any justification, and I'm not suggesting that Chief Sund said that, but there were hundreds of undercover assets. We know this from MPD. We know that there were undercover and plainclothes Secret Service, Park Police, plainclothes Capitol Police officers, numerous FBI informants. I just released a report last week on my Substack with video of an FBI informant in the Proud Boys who committed multiple offenses that day, who still has not been charged. So Chief Sund is correct. Any justification that there were legit domestic terrorists like Joe Biggs, who did nothing that day, really. But, he definitely was kept out of the loop.
Yeah, he didn't know. He said he's never not been told when this sort of thing would happen. This is the first time he's not been told that feds would be involved in an event that he was involved with.
Right. And there's a reason why, because, you can hear he's very serious. He takes this job very seriously. He's very devoted to his officers. So they kept him out of the loop. They denied his multiple requests for National Guard, which is something I also covered in my book. But when I spoke with him, he told me the first time he talked to Stephen D'Antuono, who's the Washington, D.C. FBI field office head, was on January 4th. That's the first time he spoke to him. He did not realize Stephen D'Antuono had just been promoted from the Michigan, Detroit FBI field office after pulling off the Whitmer Fednapping hoax, which involved at least a dozen FBI informants, numerous FBI undercover agents, dozens of specialty handling agents out of a number of field offices. He did not realize that that was the same guy. So, he's very focused on his job. He's gone through hell. He was the fall man, Nancy Pelosi's fall guy, forced to resign, obviously, from a job that he loved and took very seriously. I suspect since completing his book, and now with this interview with Tucker, he's sort of reassessing exactly why he was kept out of the loop and, even how some of these officers, undercover agents and uniformed officers conducted themselves and brought what could have been a rowdy protest really in some areas to violent confrontation clashes, causing death and injury to American citizens.
Julie Kelly's Substack is juliekelly.substack.com, where she writes all about this and does great investigative work. Well, I could spend a lot of time on January 6th. I guess I won't relitigate it, but I will ask you this. Don't you think that in Trump's defense, there will be a lot of relitigating this, which I find kind of interesting that Smith and this Fannie Willis woman, who we'll get into in just a minute, they're actually going to dredge all of this back up, and they're going to give Team Trump's defense the opportunity to relitigate this. I mean, all of this is going to come rushing back into the spotlight, Julie. I would assume your commentary will come rushing back into the spotlight. And now that we know more, I mean, I do kind of wonder, I mean, that assumes we got a media that's going to tell the story. Will more people become more aware? That Gretchen Whitmer case alone, to me, should be, that story should be the reason everyone in this country ought to mistrust the events of January 6th, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. But for the Whitmer Fednapping hoax, and I will say the appellate briefs for both of the men who were convicted on a retrial by this government, they received a hung jury in April of 2022. Two men were outright acquitted amid the successful defense by their attorneys of FBI entrapment. The government decided to retry two men, Adam Fox and Barry Croft. This is very important. Those appellate briefs were filed just yesterday, and they are bombshells. I'm going to be covering that next in my Substack. It's actually titled Declassified with Julie Kelly. I know that's the whatever you call it, the IRL, but it's declassified. If you don't have a grasp on what happened in the Whitmer case, how the FBI stitched these men together, how they spent so much money, lured them into sites that were then used as evidence, how Gretchen Whitmer and her detail were well aware of this plot months before, and they would check with her and her detail before they brought these men, the FBI agents, to her cottage for alleged reconnaissance. She knew about it. Her lawyer knew about it. Her security staff knew about it. My question is, what did Christopher Wray for sure knew about it? What did Bill Barr know about it? But it was to also interfere in the election. Because those arrests were announced, they set these men up, made the announcement on October 8th of 2020. Gretchen Whitmer, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden made this a key point in the waning, days of the 2020 election, blaming Donald Trump for this.
Yes.
But these men were completely set up by the FBI. I'm going to be writing about those appeals because they're so illuminating. So I'm hoping to have that up tonight or tomorrow.
And if you don't believe this, sorry to interrupt. Was it BuzzFeed? Which was the Daily Beast? Who wrote about this? The left-wing outfit that wrote about it. BuzzFeed, now defunct.
BuzzFeed, yes.
Yeah, and that was because it was mind-blowing to me that even a left-wing outlet like BuzzFeed found this so exceptional. They said that this whole plot would never have happened, but not for the feds setting it up. That's the punchline.
That's exactly right. And that's why these four defendants, two acquitted and two got a hung jury in April of 2022. What happened in the August trial is you had this judge and both appellate briefs rightfully, and I covered both of those trials, rightfully condemned and blamed the judge for putting really his whole body on the scale, not just the thumb, but body on the scale. There was evidence of jury bias, a juror who had told his coworkers that he wanted these guys to hang, that he got a jury summons and he hoped it was for this jury. Not only was he seated on the jury, the judge prevented the defense from questioning this juror themselves. He became the foreman of the jury, and that's how these men were quickly convicted on kidnapping federal.
Yeah, Julie, listen, I'm so grateful for your time and your outstanding work. Continue to follow Julie throughout all of these indictments of Donald Trump as well, which we didn't entirely have time to do. But long story short, Julie says this thing is so broad and so far. And by the way, even Bill Barr, who's live on television right now, even agrees that old Fanny down there in Georgia, he hates Trump and he wants to see Trump in a prison jumpsuit too. And even Bill Barr says old Fanny has gone too far and her indictments are far too broad. So read what Julie has written about this and all the work she does at Declassified with Julie Kelly on Substack. Julie, thank you. I'm Chris Stigall, in for Vince Coglianese today at it's 4:22. Look at that, time moving. Boy, I've got some schadenfreude coming up for you. Oh, man. This just tickles me pink. It's about Starbucks. And it actually has to do, it's a nationwide story about Starbucks. But it all started in Philadelphia, where I do my morning show. It started back in 2018, and I don't have time to get into it now. But, just wait. You're going to delight in this story as much as I've delighted in this story. It just couldn't happen to a nicer company, Starbucks. So sit tight for that. Of course, your phone calls are always welcome, too, at 888-630-9625. Also coming up today, we'll talk with Ben Klein. You know, it is the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Congressman Klein represents Virginia's 6th congressional district. Barack Obama tweeted yesterday that something to the effect of being very, very proud of old Joe, the Husk, the incredible Husk, I call him. Old Joe's 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, because of among all the many magical things it does, and I kid you not, he says it lowered health care costs. Yeah, here it is. It's been 1 year since Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, lowering health care costs for families, investing in our future, accelerating the transition to clean energy, blah, blah, blah. It's funny, I just reminded him, I thought Obamacare was supposed to lower health care costs. Wasn't it? And by the way, 1 year of the Inflation Reduction Act, and I have another story in front of me, which I'll get into with the congressman in the next hour. Many are predicting 8% mortgage rates. 8%. Yeah, happy anniversary, Inflation Reduction Act. This is WMAL. It is just fantastic to be with you today. Chris Stigall filling in for Vince. Stay in touch with me on X, formerly known as Twitter. Trying to get used to saying that after how many years? Facebook, all social media, the podcast, my own morning show down there in Philadelphia. You can always keep in touch at chrisstigall.com, ChrisStigall. One of the most brilliant pieces I've read recently was authored by the brilliant Victor Davis Hanson. It was called The Remaking of America. I don't know if you caught it last week, but it was so important to me that I wanted to speak with him directly about it. And I was so glad that he was able to make time for us today. Victor Davis Hanson, welcome to the Vince Coglianese Show. Chris Stigall filling in today. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
This piece, I wonder how long it was in the making for you. I know you're a deep thinker and you're very good at the 30,000-foot view, but this was maybe the most complete read of the disintegration of the country that I've ever seen you write or comment on. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I write 2 columns a week, and you never know which ones are going to come easily or difficult or how people are going to react to them. So that one, I think it was just sort of written out of frustration, and I looked at the world around me, both in my immediate vicinity and then abstractly as I gathered the news. So it came pretty naturally, and it came to the conclusion that we've got a lot of fundamental challenges that are starting to encroach on our freedom and our basic way of living, our ability to live as we want. And that's kind of new for modern America. And by that I mean whether it's here in California and to be able to drive safely, or to go to San Francisco safely, or to think that people cannot walk out of stores without paying for their merchandise. Just basic things, and especially where I live in the rural San Joaquin Valley, some of the things that we've always taken for granted, that people would all follow the law, that when we meet people we would all speak the same language, or we would have a common reference. All these things are starting to break down, and as I travel around the United States, it seems to be true of a lot of places as well.
Barack Obama in particular, Victor, is a figure that I believe maybe is the most consequential figure, at least in modern political history, maybe in our lifetimes, and not for the better. I don't know if you agree with the view that he's essentially a shadow president or not. That's my sense of it. I really sense he has a firm hand or grasp, or at least his influence does, on what we're watching right now. Do you?
Yeah, I think he does. And I think that was made clear with a recent interview of his premier biographer, David Garrow, when he pointed out that, unlike most presidents, Obama moved his primary residence right where he had served in the White House. So it's at Calorama. So he never really left Washington. And then, as you know, he had made that kind of Freudian slip when he said his greatest dream would be to be in the basement or in his own home and just dial in the presidency and have kind of a surrogate do it. Then he wouldn't have to do all the bothersome ceremonial aspects of the presidency, which he didn't like. He would just be able to rule by fiat. He kind of laughed about that, but as Garrow pointed out, that was kind of an insight to how he views what he's doing right now. And I think he does. I think he and Michelle Obama, from appointments to rallying people in the leftist community to pressuring Biden on policy, that's not the right word, actually, pressure. I think that by suggesting to Biden policies that he expects to be implemented, so I think he's de facto. I don't think he's upset at all that Joe Biden is challenged. In fact, I think he would want him to run for re-election.
It seems so obvious when you see even things like, the last 24 hours, Joe Biden asked, do you have any comments on Maui? And he just sheepishly crawls in the back of the car and says, no comment. I mean, something as simple as that. Politically, Victor, in any normal time in history, this would be, that's your political death knell, to be the president of the United States and have nothing to say about a state on fire?
It would. I think in a very paradoxical sense that we've come to the point where everybody seems to be in agreement that he's cognitively challenged. And in a weird way, that kind of aids his inability to conduct the presidency, because our first reaction is that's callous or that's shocking or that's ignorant. And then the second reaction is, well, of course, he's not cognitively able, so we can't really judge him as we would most presidents. So I think that's we've lowered the bar so much. And then on the case of the left, they're still obsessed with Donald Trump and their hatred of him. I think their attitude is, we don't really care how poor a President Biden is or to what degree he's not able to fulfill the duties of the presidency, as long as he's not Trump.
Victor,
and so we're in a weird situation right now.
Victor Davis Hanson writes with regularity, and you should go to his website, by the way, victorhanson.com, and follow him on Twitter, VD Hanson. The impetus for this particular conversation was this important remaking of America piece you wrote, which I just loved. I mean, everything you write I love, but this particular one was so smart. And one of the themes of the last week for me has been the fact that so many people, Victor, don't know who to trust. They don't feel there are many they can trust. There's been such a de-evolution of journalism, to the extent there is any anymore. the vacuum is filled with a lot of people's, I hate to dismiss it as conspiracy because I understand it, but I hear more of it than ever before. I'm sure you do too. When we're constantly receiving gaslighting, half-truths, news being buried, collusion with government official Washington to keep things quiet, people start to fill that vacuum quickly, Victor.
They do, and I think they're frustrated because they're not only feeling that gaslighting or that lack of trust in the institutions, they get the impression that the people who are doing this don't care either. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean if a Dr. Fauci lies under oath about gain-of-function research, he expects us to accept that even though he knows he lied. And when you look at the last four FBI directors, Mueller, Comey, McCabe, and Wray, they've either all lied under oath, especially in the case of McCabe, but also Comey with his amnesia, or Mueller feigning ignorance about the dossier, or John Brennan lying under oath, or James Clapper lying under oath. And when you see Merrick Garland and the appointment, I mean, it was almost as if he wanted to tell America, I'm going to get Joe Biden through his first term, whether you like it or not. And I'm going to put this Mr. Weiss here because he's got a record of shielding Hunter Biden. I'm going to elevate him by his title, and you can't do anything about it. And I don't really care whether he's inside or outside government. I don't really care whether he's under suspicion of his prior plea bargaining or plea deal that a judge threw out. I just don't care, and you get over it. And that's sort of the argument that our permanent administrative state and the left has. They don't even try to hide it anymore. And it's even on January 6th, we're learning now that a lot of the important documentation videos was abolished, destroyed after the breakup of the committee. And now we're learning that the head of the Capitol Police sort of agrees with the New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, Mr. Rosenberg, who said that there were FBI informants all over January 6th. And anybody who had said that was considered a conspiracist. Now we're hearing the medical community all of a sudden says, ivermectin is not horse medicine. It's a legitimate alternate use of a labeled drug. Or yes, there were some serious consequences from vaccinations, and yes, they may not have been. So all of this comes out, but never with an apology that you're not crazy for thinking this when we tried to destroy you. And that's what's really, that breeds conspiracy thinking, because when people in the government or positions of authority attack somebody for expressing an opinion that's logical and rational, that person knows that he will be eventually probably substantiated or confirmed in his belief, but he's going to pay an enormous price in the meantime. And then the people who try to suppress free expression, they never pay the consequences. So we just take it as an example that James Baker, the chief counsel of the FBI, who was paying in charge of getting money to Twitter to suppress information that was true about the laptop right before the election. And when he succeeded, he just went to the general counsel of Twitter. Instead of making $250,000 with the FBI, he made $8 million from Twitter the next year. And we just to the extent that we even know about that, and that's everyday things like that. And so that's why there's a popular revolt now, whether it's manifested with these new bluegrass or country western songs,
yes,
or they're the boycott of Bush or Anheuser-Busch or Target or Disney, or just sort of mass non-compliance with certain things in American culture. Nobody watches the Emmys, the Oscars, the Tonys anymore. They don't. The NBA audience is televised. It's just dramatically. It's about 10%, 20% of what it was 30 years ago. I think there's a reaction to all of this.
And Victor, what I've struggled to quantify, and maybe it doesn't matter, or maybe it does. Or maybe this is just terribly naive of me. There used to be certain things that you just trusted. You trusted medicine, if the CDC or the FDA said something. Maybe you never did. I don't know. Maybe this is me speaking naively, but I used to think the Department of Justice and the FBI were the good guys, and medical people were the good guys. And there were just certain things that as a country we could rally around and say, well, all right, this is chaotic, or this is divisive, or this is messy, but these people mean us well, and they're all rowing in the same direction for our common good. I don't have a single thing like that other than my church home, Victor, in my life anymore. I'll speak for myself, but I doubt I stand alone, and that's a terrible problem for the country.
No, it is. It is, and it's not just government. I think you assume that when you see which movie won the Oscar, that was not the best movie.
Yeah.
That award was given on ideological grounds. Or when you watch the women's soccer team, you expect it to be a performance art, pre-match political messaging. And that adds up.
Yes.
So people feel there's two universes, kind of like living in the Soviet Union in the 1950s or Eastern Europe, where there was the official veneer that everything is normal, but privately everybody was so cynical they just assumed that whatever they were told, they should believe the opposite. And so when Merrick Garland now says that Mr. Weiss will be a disinterested and fair special counsel, everybody's reaction is that's confirmation that he won't. And that's very dangerous, because if you have it in a free society, if you have half or more of the population so cynical, then it gets to the point where no one trusts anything. And so I guess, and there's also another thing, and I think I was trying to convey that in the article, that this is not just individual cynicism, it starts to be collective, and it starts to impair the actual working of society.
Yes.
So when you look at something like the Maui disaster and how that could have been prevented, or when you look at these near misses in airlines that we're seeing increasingly common, or you see what happened in East Palestine and the neglect of it, you get the impression that if you have an administrative state or elected officials or a popular culture it's entirely ideological, and it's not based on merit or competency, but just politics, race, ideology, then it's sort of like outside the United States in Latin America or Asia or Africa, where things don't work. And when you look at, you can see it with crime and shoplifting, smash and grab, carjacking, the open border. It's just the result of all that is chaos. And I don't know how to arrest it, but people are going to have to stand up and just say no.
That was
to a lot of things.
That was my. I could keep you and talk all day, but I don't want to abuse our time, and I'd love to have you back. So I'll close by asking you: Do you despair? Do you have hope? Because I will get emails like, "Well, the only solution is secession." Chris, we'll have to break apart as a country. I don't know. Are you fatalist? Can we pull back? Is this Rome? What are we living, and can it be fixed?
Well, there's periods of long renaissance in Rome or Byzantium, and it can be fixed, but it requires everybody to sort of be just according to their station, to the degree they can do it feasibly and without career or life destruction. They have to speak up and just say, you can call me any name in the world, homophobic, nativist, transphobe, racist, sexist. It has no meaning anymore. I'm sorry. And speak out. And I think that's starting to happen as you see with these people just say, you can go ahead and have your Bud commercials, but just count me out. I'm done with it. And, or these country songs that you see that out of nowhere, for the first time in history, some obscure singer has the number 1 and number 2 songs in the nation. So there's an anger there. And I think people are starting to say, if we don't speak up, and I think it has to be channeled politically. A lot of people have kind of a monastery of the mind where they just sort of drop out. And I think that's happened. I think now everybody, they have to register to vote. They have to volunteer to watch the vote. They should give money to the particular traditionalist or conservative candidate or cause, but they have to get involved, because if they don't, they're going to lose the country, because they don't have any idea what they're up against. This is globalized wealth of a magnitude we've never seen before. $9 trillion of market capitalization in Silicon Valley. And when you see a Sam Bankman-Fried or what Mark Zuckerberg did with $419 million in the last election, those are pretty formidable odds. But we have the people. This is the majority doesn't like what's going on. They just have to challenge these institutions, media, sports, corporate boardroom, Silicon Valley, popular culture. And they can do it because they're the majority on every issue. But they have to be seen and heard.
I am so grateful for this conversation. It's our first. I hope it won't be our last. And I am just a tremendous fan of yours, as I know so many in this audience are. There aren't many. I was just lamenting this week, Victor. There aren't many people that I feel that a lot of us collectively can rally around. The death of Rush Limbaugh is something that feels it leaves a hole in our hearts. Tucker not being, on this station every night that a lot of people tuned into. I think they miss him. Your voice. And I don't say this to embarrass you. I say it because I mean it. Your voice is a clear one that I think most people feel. I don't know. I'll speak for myself. It's a salve. It's calming because often you don't feel like there are many outposts out there we can all rally around.
Well, thank you. And I think we all miss Tucker on evening Fox. We miss Rush Limbaugh. We miss the Drudge Report that completely flipped to the left.
Yes.
A lot of these institutions, that National Review, Weekly Standard, they've either gone out of business or they flipped. So, yeah, it's a time of confusion. It really is. And we need voices to be heard on our side.
Well, thank you for being one of them, Victor. Sincerely, I hope we can have you back, sir.
Well, thank you.
Oh, well, I guess if he said it, then that must be settled. Bill Barr, who was on with Neil Cavuto on Fox this afternoon, he has declared it so. He does not believe Donald Trump will be the GOP nominee. Quite confident someone else will be. I wonder if he bases that on objective analysis or if that's his personal wish. Fox is working overtime, by the way, to make sure it's not Trump. I mean, they're running these power ranking polls. I monitor them. I don't even watch them anymore at home. That's the truth. I don't turn Fox on when I get home. I monitor it here at the office. And Fox rolls out this morning with their new power rankings poll. And I mean, they are just pushing the storyline. It can't be Trump. It probably won't be Trump. There's lots of time. Trump could slip. Yeah, he's leading now, but I doubt for long. I've never seen such a hopeful bunch of people that he goes away as so many at the crew on Fox. Sit tight. It's the one-year celebration of the incredible Husks Inflation Reduction Act. Ben Klein, Virginia's 6th Congressional District Representative, will be here to celebrate. I'm Chris Stigall in for Vince Coglianese on WMAL.